Okay, good.
Good day and welcome to the online workshop on disaster risk reduction and early warning systems for all through effective gender governance, gender responsive planning, digital government transformation, and financing. My name is Ana Tordo, and I am a governance and public administration expert at the United Nations Project Office on Governance of UNDESA, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator for the opening session. This certificate workshop is jointly organized by UNITAR CIFAL Jeju International Training Center, UNDRR Global Education and Training Institute, and Making Cities Resilient 2030, UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality, and UNDESA DPIDG through its Project Office on Governance, UNPOG. We are grateful for the support of Incheon Metropolitan City and the Ministry of Interior and Safety of the Republic of Korea. The workshop will introduce concepts and tools to help ensure effective and people-centered DRR and early warning systems, gender-responsive approaches with tools, checklists, and good practices for gender mainstreaming. This year, we have over 3,000 participants registered for the workshop. Our goal is to make this event as engaging as possible. We aim to facilitate knowledge exchange, share your experience, and ensure you earn a certificate. To start the opening session, I invite you to join me in giving a warm welcome to our keynote speakers. We have the privilege of hearing the welcome remarks from Mr. Byung-Hwan Chung, Director of UNITAR CIFAL Jeju International Training Center. Mr. Chung, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I would like to begin by warmly welcoming all of you to our online workshop on disaster risk reduction and early warning systems for all through effective gender responsible planning, digital government transformation, and financing. It's remarkable that around 3,000 participants from 157 countries registered to attend this workshop. We are well aware of the fact that the huge impact of disasters is without borders. Therefore, every country should work together to come up with ways to achieve disaster risk reduction. That's why this workshop is meaningful, and we will focus on the early warning system this time as an important tool for the disaster risk reduction. As you are well aware, the significance of the early warning system was emphasized by the UN Secretary General 2 years ago, and 5-year action plans were proposed last year to faithfully implement the UN's early warning system initiative. So I hope this workshop could be of some help to address the challenges caused by the climate-induced disasters through the early warning system. I also would like to thank 3 distinguished UN agencies for co-hosting this workshop: UN Project Office on Governance of the UNDESA, UN Disaster Risk Reduction Office for Northeast Asia, and the UN Women's Center for Gender Equality. Finally, I would like to express my special thanks to all the speakers for sharing their invaluable insights. And I appreciate our participants' great interest in this workshop and sincerely look forward to your successful journey with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chung, for your introductory remarks. And next, I would like to welcome Ms. Haeyeon Kim, Head of the United Nations Project Office on Governance, DPIDG UNDESA, to deliver her remarks. Ms. Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Mr. Chung, for your insightful remarks. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. Distinguished guests and partners, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this important workshop and to deliver my remarks for this 3-day online workshop. I'm delighted to discuss how to address some of the most pressing challenges facing our world today. Your participation underscores the critical role of risk-informed governance, early warning systems, digital government transformation, and innovative finance for DRR and resilience. Taking this opportunity, I'd like to express my gratitude and satisfaction for the continued partnership and collaboration between our institutions, that's UNPOG, UNDRR, UNITAR CIFAL Jeju, and UN Women. In a rapidly changing world, digital government transformation presents extraordinary opportunities to enhance DRR, early warning systems, and resilience to disaster. Effective public governance using advanced technologies such as big data, AI, and other innovations can strengthen resilience to disasters. It's important to note that based on current trends, the climate crisis is making global trend worse. And if we do not address it, it will cause devastating damage. We need to mobilize innovative solutions and local action for transformative change, as the UN Secretary General calls for a decade of action. If the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Agreement, and the Sendai Framework for DRR are to be successfully implemented, a more risk-informed governance, people-centered, and innovative approach is required. This workshop, therefore, provides a timely and unique platform to discuss and share knowledge on the concepts, tools, and approaches on how to localize international frameworks into local or national context for resilience and sustainable development. It will also give us a chance to learn how to use digital government tools and data for disaster risk reduction and resilience. Over the years, UNPOG has been providing capacity development support to member states in strengthening public governance and leveraging digital technologies such as AI and big data analytics, including open government data for DRR and resilience. UNPOG, in collaboration with UNDRR, developed the toolkit on risk-informed governance and innovative technologies for DRR and resilience, and the handbook of strengthening resilience in cities and local communities through innovation and digital governance. UNPOG will continue to enhance efforts in strengthening its partnership with UNDRR, UNITAR Jeju, UN Women, and other partners to strengthen the capacities of member states in accelerating progress on the 2030 Agenda. I strongly believe that this workshop will provide a great platform for in-depth discussions, knowledge sharing, peer-to-peer learning, and lessons learned on innovative practices and solutions. UNPOG looks forward to further engaging with you based on your feedback and the capacity development requests you might have for our own follow-up actions. I hope you all have a great discussion and a successful workshop. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kim, for your insightful remarks. Our next speaker is Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia, Head of UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, Office for Northeast Asia and Global Education and Training Institute. Sanjaya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Director Chung, for your welcoming remarks, and Director Kim for your introductory remarks. This training comes at a very interesting time when we are halfway through the work on not only the Sendai framework but also the Paris Agreement and the UN Agenda 2030, or the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's why this training this year is focusing on early warning, because it is one of the key instruments which can save lives and protect property, but also looking at it not only in the technical aspect, but also looking at the other aspects which influence the vulnerability of populations, including the gender responsiveness of all the policies and the applications of technology for reducing the risks. So we hope that this training session will be very useful for you, and that you will be able to apply some of these tools and also the cases that we will discuss in your work later on. We'd be very happy to hear from you how you have been able to apply this. I see from the participants that it covers the entire globe, right from the we have from the Americas all the way to the Pacific. So we will try to make it as practical and realistic as possible. I'd like to thank our partners in this, especially the UNITAR Cephal Center at Jeju, which has been a long-standing partner of UNDRR. Also UNPOG, which has also been a long-standing partner for us. And UN Women, with whom we are working on this session first time. So we really look forward to this new collaboration and continue this over the coming years. So with that, I'd like to end my remarks and thank you all for your participation.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia, for your insightful remarks. And let us welcome for the first edition, and Mr. Sanjaya said, Ms. Jeonshim Lee, Director of UN Women Center of Excellence for Gender Equality. Ms. Lee, you have the floor. We're going to see through video. Thank you, Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia, for your insightful remarks. And let us welcome for the first edition, and Mr. Sanjaya said, Ms. Jeonshim Lee, Director of UN Women Center of Excellence for Gender Equality. Ms. Lee, you have the floor. We're going to see through video.
Welcome you to this online workshop on disaster risk reduction and early warning systems for all through effective gender responsive planning, digital government transformation, and financing gender transformative disaster risk reduction. For several years, UNDESA, through the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government, UNPOG, UNITAR Cephal Jeju, and the UNDRR Global Education and Training Institute, and Making Cities Resilient, have been conducting annual trainings on disaster risk reduction. I'm very grateful that UN Women is participating in these important efforts this year. Women and girls are among the most vulnerable to disasters due to pre-existing inequalities that worsen during crisis. Women experience uneven levels of resilience and capacity in disasters and recovery. They suffer greater losses in livelihoods, and their economic opportunities after a disaster are more severely affected compared to men. Gender-based violence often increases following a disaster. Despite frequently leading community-level solutions, women and girls are often absent from decision-making processes, policy formation, and solution creation. In response, UN Women is advancing gender-responsive disaster risk reduction, particularly early warning systems. Our goal is to close gender gaps in early warning systems and make related policies more inclusive. This includes empowering women and women's organizations to share their experiences and knowledge. During this 3-day workshop, UN Women will share the tools and the insights we have developed at global, regional, and country levels to create more resilient and inclusive disaster risk reduction policies for everyone. We hope you can take advantage of these resources in your work. We thank our partners for making this training possible and look forward to further collaboration with all of you. Together, we can achieve even better, equitable, and sustainable results. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. I hear my voice twice. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lee, and all keynote speakers for your insightful remarks. Please join me in giving a round of applause. Next is a short video introduction Dasha, you can play the video. Thank you. Thank you to UNDRR for facilitating this inspiring video. Now I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Ms. Hyun Grace Lee, Program Officer at UNITAR CIFA Jeju International Training Center, who will provide us an overview of the workshop. Grace, over to you.
Thank you, Anna, for inviting me to the floor. I would first like to say it's a great pleasure to meet everyone in this 2024 DRR workshop. I'm Hyunju Grace Lee, Program Officer of Municipal Jeju, and I'll be your facilitator for the day 3. Today, I'm here for the orientation of this training workshop. Now, I would like to go over our workshop overview briefly. This capacity development workshop on disaster risk reduction and early warning systems, under the title of Online Workshop on Disaster Risk Reduction and Early Warning System for All through Effective Gender Responsive Planning, Digital Government Transformation and Financing, is co-organized by University of Jeju, UN Project Office on Governance, UNDR Global Education and Training Center, and UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality. This year, the program is focused on disaster risk reduction and early warning systems, assessment, planning, innovation, digital governance, and financing, which are aimed at gender-responsive localization and implementation of the Sendai Framework for DRR 2015 to 30 target on multi-hazard early warning systems. As you may well be able to notice, most of our objectives this year officially aim to mainstream gender, as UN Women joined as one of our host organizations. By focusing on these objectives at the end of the workshop, we hope you will have understood the main concepts and global frameworks for gender-responsive early warning systems in the context of DRR and climate change adaptation, as well as related innovative finance mechanisms in support of the implementation of the SDGs and the Sendai Framework for DRR 2015 to 30. In the interest of time, I will not go through every single details of our objectives and expected outcomes. However, it will be a very good start if you could refer to details at your convenience. The workshop will be comprised of a diverse variety of sessions, including lectures, Q&As, quizzes, and other interactive activities we prepared. As you can see in the table, there are 3 thematic sessions on separate days. Day 1 will explore key concepts and issues related to gender-responsive multi-hazard early warning systems in the context of disaster, climate, and complex systematic risk and resilience. Day 2 on risk-informed sustainable development, digital government innovation, and frontier technologies for building resilience and gender-responsive early warning systems. And lastly, day 3 on fundamentals and practices of gender-responsive disaster risk reduction financing, with a special focus on disseminating and strengthening countries' early warning and actions. As mentioned previously, we will present gender mainstreaming sessions tailored for each themes of the day: gender responsive assessment and planning, digital governance, and financing. Each of these thematic sessions will be led and coordinated by one partner organization with support from others. Now, I would like to share some statistical information of the participants who have joined the program today. This year, similar to last year, but with an increase, we received a significant number of registrations for the program, about 2,925 participants from 147 countries after filtering the original entries over 3,000. As you can see in the pie chart, there are large portions in the countries such as the Philippines, almost 1/4 of the participants, followed by Indonesia, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Sri Lanka, and so on. Next, about the gender, we are having gender ratio of 55% male to 44% female. In terms of organization affiliation part, about 31.9% of participants are from either local, state, or national governments. And you may notice that approximately 49% are joining from academia, NGO, and private sector, representing a significant increase from the last year. Participants from international organizations, UN system, and regional organizations account for around 14%. This time, I would like to present some brief introduction of the organizing institutes. To start with, the first partner organization is the UNITAR CIFAL Jeju. UNITAR stands for United Nations Institute for Training and Research. CIFAL Jeju is one of the 31 UNITAR's regional training centers globally, and its main mission is to facilitate measurable knowledge and skills for more effective, sustainable development at the local level. Our second host organization is the United Nations Project Office on Governance, which is an integral part of the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government, UNDESA. The office was inaugurated in 2016. Its mandate is to assist member states in fostering effective, innovative, and citizen-centered public governance to translate the SDGs into strategies and programs at the country level. The leadership of the UNPOG rests with Ms. Hae-young Kim, former Senior Vice President of the National Information Society Agency of the Republic of Korea. The third co-hosting UN agency is the UNDRR Office for Northeast Asia and Global Education and Training Institute, which was established in 2010 to develop a new cadre of professionals in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation to build disaster resilient societies. UNDRR ONEA and Getty is led by Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia, the former head of the International Recovery Platform. Last but not least, our new and first partner organization is the UN Women Center of Excellence for Gender Equality. The center, established in 2022 with the support of the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family of the Republic of Korea, aspires to function as a knowledge and partnership hub for the Asia-Pacific region. It strives to engage in activities that underscore the importance of gender equality and enhance the capacity of policymakers and practitioners from both public and private sectors. Ms. Jung-Shim Lee, former Deputy Minister at the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family of the Republic of Korea, is the one who heads this organization. We will now proceed to the housekeeping announcements. Please kindly check the attendance for each session using the same name and email address. However, only one entry per day is required. If you submitted multiple entries for assurance, the information of the latest one will be used. Regardless of attendance checks, your presence in all sessions is highly requested. Also, your cooperation in renaming Zoom name with your full name and organization is required. In addition, it would be very appreciated if you could actively take part in interactive activities, including quizzes and opinion sharing time. And questions will be addressed after each presentation. Please submit your questions in Google Forms that will be shared in the chat window. In the Google Forms, you will be able to find speaker's name where you can send your questions. Please allow us to provide some more time to explain certificate requirements. In order to issue the certificate of participation, all 3-day attendance plus the completion of pre- and post-event evaluation surveys are very necessary. Attendance will be exclusively checked by entries to an attendance form, which link will be shared a few times during our sessions. Please kindly again be reminded to use the same name and email address for all 3 days for our check. These names will be used to issue your certificates. Also, the pre-workshop assessment link was shared through the workshop announcement email sent last week. For those who missed the pre-workshop knowledge assessment, please make up by today. We have one more additional notice regarding the issuance of certificates. Due to the overwhelming number of participants, we would like to inform you that the issuance of certificates will take at least a month after this workshop. In line with this massive number of participants of this workshop, we have devised a new policy for handling certificate issuance complaints. This is not for minor changes like changing names. It is for the re-evaluation of certificate eligibility who did not receive certificates. To ensure efficient handling of the complaints within our administrative capacity of host organizations, response time will be limited to 2 weeks after the issuance of certificates. And for this, we will open a Google form to receive appeals, and this will be shared with participants after the workshop. Only successful appeals will be processed with certificates and be replied to. We would like to seek the greatest understanding of our participants on this matter due to the limited capacity of us. This is the last slide of our orientation. We highly value your personal data and respect your privacy rights. Hence, we acknowledge and respect your decision to depart if you do not agree with the following. Please note that this event will be recorded and the recordings will be likely posted on the YouTube or websites of UNDR Oneyageti, UNDESA DPIDG, UNBOG, UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality, and University of Jeju. The personal data of participants applying or registering for or participating in this training course is governed by the Data Protection and Privacy Policy of UNITAR. By applying or registering for or participating in this event, the participant acknowledges that he/she/they is aware of the policy and agrees to its terms. The policy document is publicly available in the UNITAR homepage. So this is all from my end for now. Thank you all for listening. Now I would like to give the floor back to Anna. Anna, floor is over to you.
Thank you, Grace, for the wonderful orientation and for sharing the program, housekeeping information, and interesting statistics. Let's move to our first session, and I give the floor to Ms. Dasha Moknasheva, Program Management Officer at the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, to conduct our first session. Dasha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, Grace, and thank you to all partners for the excellent opening session. So my name is Daria Moknachova, and I'm Program Officer at the UNDR Office for Northeast Asia and the Global Education and Training Institute, which is based in Incheon in South Korea. So I would like to warmly welcome you to session 1, which is about setting the scene on disaster risk reduction and gender-responsive early warning and early action. So on behalf of UNDR, it is really the greatest pleasure for me to be co-facilitating this first session of the 3-day workshop, which will introduce some key concepts and issues related to gender-responsive, multi-hazard early warning systems in the context of disaster risk reduction and resilience. The objectives of this first session are to strengthen participants' understanding of key concepts and elements of disaster risk reduction, including the role of multi-hazard early warning systems in the broader context of DRR. We also aim to introduce some key relevant global policy frameworks, initiatives, as well as some new approaches to risk governance and to early warning, such as the Early Warnings for All initiative, about which you will hear later. We will also discuss some challenges and approaches to ensuring effective gender-responsive multi-hazard early warning systems. And we will introduce some practical tools for national and local planning and implementation of effective and gender-responsive multi-hazard early warning systems. So this first session will include 4 presentations, starting with an introduction to DRR and early warning and key related concepts and frameworks. It will be followed by a presentation of practical tools to support national and local governments to assess their current capacities and gaps in establishing and implementing effective multi-hazard early warning systems. And we'll also include a practical exercise to allow you to get familiar with one of these tools and its methodology. So that will be the session led by Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia. After the break, the Center of Excellence of UN Women will introduce some key concepts and frameworks in support of gender-responsive disaster risk reduction. And finally, we will also have a presentation on tools to design gender-responsive early warning and early action with some case studies. We will then close the day with an interactive quiz that will help you to test and practice your knowledge. So we invite you to all participate in it very actively and also actively engage in the sessions. So we will have several Q&A sessions throughout the day today. So please prepare your questions to the speakers and post them through the form that is shared through the chat. Our speakers today are myself, as well as Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia, head of our office in Incheon, so Onea and Getty. Ms. Wu Fong Li, Gender Training Specialist at UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality in Seoul, and Ms. Wona Cha, Gender and Climate Change Consultant at the UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality. In addition, my colleagues will be posting various useful resources, as well as key housekeeping announcements in the chat, so please keep track of those as well. And now I would like to invite you to the first session of the day, which is going to set the scene and introduce disaster risk reduction, resilience, and early warning concepts. So disasters are rapidly increasing around the world, and they continue to make headlines every year. So you can think of some recent destructive floods, most recently in Bangladesh and Nepal, also hurricanes in the Caribbean, cyclones in Southeast Asia, as well as droughts in Southern Africa, wildfires in California, Southern Europe, and earthquakes, West Asia and Northeast Asia. So if these current trends continue, then the number of disasters per year globally may increase to 40% by 2030 compared to 2015, which is the lifespan of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. That would mean 1.5 disasters a day. So let's look at some key concepts. And our first message here is that there is no such thing as a natural disaster, only natural hazards. And this is very important to understand, because if we know that disasters are not natural, we know that they are not inevitable. So for example, a hazard does not always become a disaster. When you look at the picture on the top of the screen, when a hazard strikes an uninhabited area, it does not result in much losses or damage for human life, the economy, or assets, and therefore it is not a disaster. However, if it occurs in an area which is densely populated, like the pictures on the bottom of the screen, and if the population and infrastructure are not prepared to cope with it, then a disaster happens. So disaster risk is a combination of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability of people and assets. And this simplified picture of risk helps to understand how these different components interact with each other. So the rock you see on top of the mountain symbolizes a hazard. It may or it may not turn into a disaster. So for example, if it strikes an uninhabited area, it does not result in losses and damage. And it is not a disaster, and it constitutes a very limited risk. However, hazards can threaten to harm people and can turn into a disaster if certain conditions are in place. So these are the two concepts of exposure and vulnerability. For example, if people build their houses and schools near a hazard, like on this picture, so it could be in real life a mountain slope or a coastal area or a river bank, they would be particularly exposed to disaster risk. Or if people have pre-existing vulnerabilities, they will also be more susceptible to the impacts of hazards. So that could be, for example, poor health or disability, or limited financial resources, limited education and knowledge of risk, or other conditions that can be determined by physical, social, economic factors, including gender inequality. So in fact, gender norms and roles and relations within a given culture and within a society also have an impact on disaster risk, with gender discrimination often limiting the control that women and girls have over decisions, as well as their access to resources and opportunities. So this can increase their exposure to risk, resulting in women and girls experiencing higher mortality, injury, and loss of livelihoods during disasters. So when a hazard occurs in an area where people are exposed and vulnerable, and if the population and infrastructure are not prepared to cope with it, then a disaster can happen. UNDR defines disaster as a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society, leading to human, material, economic, and environmental losses and impacts. However, there are different types of measures that we can take to prevent disaster or mitigate their impacts, and to protect the lives and assets and livelihoods of communities. So on this picture, they are symbolized by the wall. In real life, these can be hard infrastructure measures, for example, embankments to prevent river floods, or retrofitting buildings to make them more resistant to earthquakes. Or it could be preventive policies and legislation to ban constructions in risk-prone areas. And it could also be all kinds of preparedness measures to strengthen the capacity of governments, local organizations, communities, and individuals to anticipate, respond, and recover from the impacts of disasters. So this can, for example, be done through education in schools, or through plans and emergency evacuation drills, or by setting aside some resources to support emergency response. So to summarize, hazards, exposure, and vulnerability are three very important concepts to understand disaster risk. And while the hazard is natural, its impacts are not. They are the result of the choices that we make as to where we live, where we build, how we protect and support people and livelihoods. And disaster risk is the result of many different factors, such as physical, social, economic, and environmental factors. And today we live in a rapidly changing world where risk factors are becoming increasingly complex and interrelated. So along with intensifying disaster trends and more frequent extreme events, we also see environmental degradation, global economic crisis, poverty and inequality, pandemics, or poorly planned urban development, as well as weak governance that are all driving risk. And climate change further adds to this complexity by acting as a magnifying factor in disaster contexts. So these ever-increasing interrelated acute and chronic stresses and risks significantly undermine sustainable development. Given all these complex challenges, we cannot eliminate risks entirely, and we cannot prevent hazards from occurring, but we can control other aspects of risk, in particular exposure, vulnerability, and resilience. So resilience is the ability to withstand and bounce back from shocks and chronic stresses. And if resilience is low, then the impacts of disasters can be worse and recovery can take longer. But if resilience is high, then the impacts will be lower and recovery may be faster. And we can take various actions to strengthen the resilience of people and assets, and in that way reduce the likelihood of a hazard becoming a disaster. So that's what we call disaster risk reduction, or DRR. So that includes all the policies and strategies and measures that can make people, cities, and countries more resilient to hazards and that reduce risks that lead to disasters. So disaster risk governance is not an option anymore in the face of the complex and increasing risks that the society is facing. And effective risk-informed governance is key to reducing disaster risk. So far, many governments have been prioritizing disaster management and disaster response, but this approach isn't equipped enough to deal with the scale of challenges that we face as these disasters become more and more unpredictable and costly. So instead, we need to focus on risk prevention and learning to manage uncertainty. So we need to move from the left-hand side of this picture to the right-hand side. We need to stop reacting and responding to disasters as they come and move to a more preventive-oriented approach. And we need also to embrace risk-informed and systemic approaches and decision-making processes. So for this, it's very important to better understand systemic risks and constantly readjust and plan for them. And that's really what the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction is about. So it's about shifting the focus from disaster management to disaster risk management, from response to preparedness and prevention. And the goal of the Sendai framework is to prevent new risks and reduce existing ones, and to strengthen social and economic resilience as a key factor for achieving sustainable development. So the Sendai framework was adopted in 2015 with a time period of 15 years until 2030, and it is the main international agreement, which is non-binding, to support global action on disaster risk reduction. So it encourages action by governments, international organizations, and communities and individuals as well to reduce exposure to hazards and reduce vulnerability of people so as to increase the overall resilience of the society. So this framework really promotes a whole of government and a whole of society approach, and it gives particular attention to local level implementation and to the role of local governments and actors. And in addition, the guiding principles of the Sendai framework also recognize the need for a gender perspective to be integrated into all disaster risk reduction policies and practices, and highlights the importance of women's participation and leadership. The Sendai framework has 7 global targets. So 4 targets that aim to reduce mortality, the number of people affected, economic loss and damage to economic loss and also damage to infrastructure. And there are also 3 targets which aim to increase DRR strategies, international cooperation, and the availability of multi-hazard early warning systems and risk information. The framework also has 4 priorities for action, which include improved understanding of risk, strengthening disaster risk reduction governance, investing in DRR, and enhancing preparedness for effective response and recovery. And the implementation of the framework is very much connected to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, and many others. So all these global frameworks work hand in hand as a set of complementary efforts towards this common goal of ensuring risk-informed, sustainable development and resilient societies. As Sanjaya mentioned, 2023 was a very important milestone in the implementation of the Sendai framework, as well as many other global agreements. So it marked a midpoint in the implementation of the Sendai framework. And a midterm review was conducted to assess progress in implementing the Sendai framework. And that showed that while some progress was seen, for example, on the reduction of mortality and the increase in the number of national and local DRR strategies, actually most targets are still not on track, and governments and society need to mobilize more active efforts to achieve the Sendai framework targets by 2030. One of the recommendations of the midterm review was to further support local level governments, local level action for disaster risk reduction. So indeed, local governments, as many of you know, are at the front line of disaster management, response, and risk reduction. They have very crucial roles and responsibilities in that area, and that requires specific capacities, knowledge, institutional arrangements, as well as resources. So to support local level implementation of the Sendai framework, UNDR and its partners have developed various tools over the years. One of these tools is the 10 Essentials for Making Cities Resilient, which is a 10-point checklist that serves as a guide for local level action by helping to unpack the Sendai framework and break down what it means to implement Sendai at the local level. So these 10 essentials, they cover all aspects of disaster risk reduction, from governance to preparedness to response and recovery. All of the key areas of work that cities need to engage for resilience. And there is also a global initiative connecting cities and local governments called Making Cities Resilient 2030, or in short, MCR 2030, which also provides various tools and guidance and support to local governments to help with disaster risk reduction planning and implementation. So one of the tools that we will introduce later today is based on these 10 essentials for making cities resilient. And now moving on to the multi-hazard early warning systems, and why it's so important to talk about them. It's because they're a proven, effective, and feasible disaster risk reduction measures. And multi-hazard early warning systems are defined by UNDR as an integrated system of hazard monitoring, forecasting and prediction, disaster risk assessment, communication and preparedness activities, systems and processes that enable individuals, communities, governments, businesses, and others to take timely action to reduce disaster risks in advance of hazardous events. And we see through recent research that advances in early warning systems and preparedness have saved tens of thousands of lives and hundreds of billions of dollars globally. Multi-hazard early warning systems can really help to minimize the harm to people, to assets and livelihoods by providing critical advance notification of a hazard and triggering early action. So the Sendai framework calls for people-centered, multi-hazard, multi-sectoral early warning systems for improved disaster preparedness, for effective response and recovery. And target G, the 7th target of the Sendai framework, specifically advocates for a substantial increase in the ability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information and assessments for all people by 2030. It also includes some additional specific targets. So for example, target G2 looks at the number of countries that have multi-hazard monitoring and forecasting systems. And target G4 looks at the percentage of local governments having a plan to act on multi-hazard early warning. Early warning systems include the following 4 key and interrelated components. So the first one is disaster risk knowledge based on systematic collection of data and disaster risk assessments. The second one is detection, monitoring, analyzing, and forecasting of hazards and possible consequences. The third one is dissemination and communication by an official source of timely, accurate, and actionable warnings, including information on likelihood and impact. And finally, the fourth component is preparedness at all levels of society to respond to the warnings that people receive. In addition, an effective multi-hazard early warning system must be multi-hazard, meaning it's designed to address different hazards that may occur alone, simultaneously, or in a cascading way in a given location. They also must be end-to-end, so they must connect the entire chain from the detection of the hazard to actual action by people who are exposed to it. It must also be people-centered, so designed with people and their needs in mind, and empowering them to act on time to reduce potential harm. So this means also that it has to be gender responsive. And we will see that in more detail in the second half of today's session. The number of countries reporting the existence of multi-hazard early warning systems has doubled since 2015. So this is very encouraging. And there are about 101 countries which had declared having such multi-hazard early warning systems in 2023. And this is thanks to all the advances in science and technology, together with the increase in the availability of observation data and the implementation of common alerting protocols. All of this has led to the improvements of forecasts and public access to early warning. So this improved coverage has also resulted in reduced mortality and reduced impacts of disasters. However, despite this progress, just under half of all countries still lack multi-hazard early warning coverage. And the numbers are even lower for developing countries. So, for example, less than half of the least developed countries and only 1/3 of small island developing states have a multi-hazard early warning system. And countries in the Americas, Caribbean, and Africa still face persistent gaps in coverage. So our next session will look into some of the initiatives and tools that are available to support countries and local governments to ensure effective multi-hazard early warning systems. We also have the sources that I cited today with the figures and the statistics about the status of global early warning systems are available online, and you can see the reference here in my presentation, and we will also share some key resources with you. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and I would like to have some time for questions and answers. I've been seeing a lot of different questions being posted in the chat and in our forum. So perhaps let me address some of them. There was one which was very particular to the situation in Nepal. What are the main challenges and in implementing and maintaining effective early warning systems in Nepal? So while it would be very difficult for me to speak about individual countries and their specific situation, what I can share with you is the overall challenges that have been identified in terms of establishing multi-hazard early warning systems. And one of them is that risk knowledge still remains very low in terms of what are the different risks that countries and localities are exposed to. There are also some gaps in terms of ensuring monitoring and forecasting, having observation networks at the local level, and this is particularly in the African continent, as well as some parts of the Pacific. Another challenge is the affordability of early warning systems. This is still a barrier, especially in low-income countries, and some of the high-tech solutions might be quite difficult to implement in some contexts. And finally, one big challenge is reaching those communities that are the most isolated, the most remote, which are often very hard to reach and support. And this is happening globally, despite advances in technology. So this is one answer. I hope it answers your question. Let me see also if my colleagues have shared something on the 10 essentials to make cities resilient, strengthening local governments. Okay, this is quite a specific question as well. what do we call a local government? So basically, when we talk about the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative and the 10 essentials to, or supporting capacity building of local governments, we mean any level at subnational level, any level of governance which is subnational. So it can be a city, a municipality, a locality, or a county, a village. So regardless of that, wherever decisions need to be made on disaster risk reduction and action must be implemented, it's really important to support local decision makers and provide key tools and support their capacity building. All right, so can we possibly add a feedback mechanism for the 4 elements of a good early warning system? So I'm not sure if I understand this correctly, but I showed in one of the earlier slides the targets of the Sendai framework and target G. So there's a global system called the Sendai Framework Monitor, which allows countries to report on their disaster risk reduction targets. And they can report on the specific 4 components, 4 elements of early warning as well. So I hope this answers your question. Next, what steps can be taken deliberately to enhance multi-sector early warning systems? So this actually is something that we will cover in the next session. We will provide some key tools that help to understand what are the different steps in order to design and implement effective disaster early warning systems. Okay, as you mentioned that we are shifting from disaster management to disaster risk management. What is the difference between the two? So disaster management often is the response. When a disaster occurs, then the governments and maybe some NGOs and international organizations, local communities will need to provide relief to the people who are affected. So this is disaster management. Disaster risk management is preemptively managing risk. So this is the prevention work that I mentioned before. It's the different actions and policies that can be taken and put in place in advance to reduce disaster risk, reduce the likelihood of a hazard becoming a disaster. But in a way, also disaster management is encompasses both response and risk management. So it's broader, let's say, than disaster risk management. But why we make this emphasis is because preventive action is absolutely key to strengthen society's resilience and help them bounce back more easily after a disaster. What funding opportunities are available for disaster risk reduction initiatives? How can communities access them? So we will talk about finance in day 3 of this workshop. And I hope that your question will be answered at that time. What I can say is that unfortunately, finance for disaster risk reduction is insufficient. And there is clearly a need to invest more into disaster risk reduction. Right, so what maybe one last question, because we need to move on to the next session. How to improve the participation and involvement of NGOs in disaster risk reduction targets if they are not given attention by local government? So, for this, collective action usually is a very powerful tool. So bringing as many people together to bring these issues to the attention of local governments. Because communities, they also vote. They are the ones who, in many contexts, who can influence decision-making and policies. So it's very important to bring these voices more strongly. And by working together, maybe as a coalition, different NGOs could potentially influence that. And at the global level, there are also different ways for the civil society to engage in the Sendai framework implementation process. And that is the Sendai, the UNDR stakeholder engagement mechanism, or SEM. We can provide a link to that in the chat. And there is also numerous guidance available on the global platform for disaster risk reduction resources, which is called Prevention Web. So there are many resources and examples and case studies which show how civil society and NGOs can effectively support local level disaster risk reduction. So with that, I'm afraid I'll have to close the present Q&A session, but we will have more opportunities during this today to address many of the other questions that we have been receiving. So thank you so much for these very interesting questions. And with that, I would like to move on to the next session, which is tools for early warning. And I would like to invite Mr. Sanjay Bhatia, head of our office, to make this presentation of early warning effectiveness indicators and the scorecard, as well as early warnings for all. Sanjay, the floor is yours. I think you might be muted.
Sorry, thank you. Next slide, please. So I think what I'll try to do is I'll talk about some of the tools, but also introduce the early warning for all global initiative. So this was introduced recently by the United Nations. It's a multi-agency and multi-partnership trying to ensure that effective early warning systems are available in each country. So many countries have early warning systems only for floods or hurricanes or other hazards. But what this is looking at is multi-hazard, so covering all kinds of hazards, but also ensuring that they are understood by the communities and that they create a reaction when they are issued. Because if there is an early warning but people cannot understand or cannot implement or react to it, then again that is a problem. Next slide, please. So there are 4 pillars, and I saw there was one question if we can add a pillar. So mostly these 4 pillars, they cover all the aspects. So it is about having risk knowledge as part of the early warning or the foundation of the early warning. There should be systems to detect, to observe, and forecast. There should be response capabilities so that when you know that something is going to happen, how are you going to respond? And there should be the dissemination means, the technical mechanics to ensure that the messages reach everyone. So this does mostly cover, but if you have a 5th element, we would like to know which you think is missing from this. Also, there was a question about how technology can help reduce the cost. So technology can definitely help reduce the cost of early warning. For example, many governments are using the SMS system. That means they just tell the telephone company, and the telephone company sends the early warning message to everyone who has a phone connection with that company. So that really reduces the cost of sending that message to each and every individual household. So there are many ways using the TV, using the radio, and other ways like using satellite signals for remote areas. So all of these, they help to reduce the cost, not only of delivering the message, but also of ensuring that people respond to it. Next, please. Next slide, please. So these are the partners. As you can see, it's a who's who of UN agencies, but also non-UN technical partners who are helping. And there is the Green Climate Fund, which is providing some funding for establishing the early warning systems in countries. Next slide, please. And then again, looking at the implementation. So most important is that there is a toolkit, and today we will work with that toolkit a bit. Of course, we have limited time, but just near the end of my session, we will look at some of the tools, the indicators that are available, and see how you can work with that. Next slide. So next. Yeah, so now we look at some of the cases where countries have, and these are just some cases. That doesn't mean there aren't more. There are many more, but these are just some good examples we have picked up. So here, for example, this is from Sierra Leone, and what they have done is they have the hazard map. On that, they have superimposed the issues of vulnerability through indicators such as population change, migration, food insecurity, gender distribution, literacy levels, Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient is the inequality in wealth, life expectancy, infant mortality, and so on. So all of these are indicators of the underlying drivers of risk. Why? Because when these indicators are low, it means the people are more vulnerable because they have lower coping capacity. And when they have lower coping capacity and a disaster impacts, they are not able to deal with the consequences, and the impact of the disaster is more. So so they superimpose this on the hazard map, and then they are able to find what is the exposure and the vulnerability, and which areas are more vulnerable, more exposed. So that helps the government to prioritize some of the actions. And if you see the last map, the third map, that is about the resilience. So again, that would be an opposite of the hazard, exposure, and vulnerability map in a way. So and somebody had asked a question in the Q&A about how is resilience different from risk reduction. So resilience is a broader term, and it includes all these underlying drivers of risk. So in this case, all these underlying drivers of risk have been used to study the vulnerability and exposure, and then also see which areas are more resilient, which areas need more attention. So good idea to prioritize. Next slide. Next. And another example is this is where they have 9,900 flood gauges, and you can see the green dots. Each is a flood gauge. Flood gauge means it's monitoring the level of the water of the river, and will give an early warning on potential floods. Now it can be accessed through a link, water.weather.gov, and anybody can access, and they can get the information about what is happening. Is there chances of a flood? Is the water rising? Is the water receding? So all of these, this information is available to the public through this system. So again, it's a good practice, and it's all about managing data. Next slide, please. So I think many of you may have heard about the Common Alerting Protocol, CAP. So Common Alerting Protocol is trying to bring a standard in the early warning messages. So creating a message which can be used in multimedia, multiple sources of media, and it can be specialized to, for example, help those who are deaf or blind. It can provide alerts in multiple languages and so on. So all governments are encouraged to use the Common Alerting Protocol, and these standards are freely available, can be downloaded, and then you can use them. So again, a good practice. Next slide. Next. And then we have I think this is the case study from the Solomon Islands, where they had a tsunami in 2007, which caused many deaths, and there was no early warning. So what they did was they established an early warning system, and here we see the school children who are doing the drill for the early warning. So what it shows is that firstly, you need the early warning system, but secondly, the people need to know how to respond to the early warning. Because if they just hear a siren or a whistle, but they don't know what to do, then again, it defeats the purpose. So in this case, you see that there's an earthquake scenario, and they are doing the drop, cover, hold to protect themselves. And then later, because of the potential for tsunami, they are evacuating the school and moving to higher ground. So this is very important. This has been seen, it's a factor for all countries. So for example, in Japan, when the tsunami happened, many people did not respond to the early warning. And one of the reasons was that they thought the seawall would protect them. So again, it doesn't matter the economic capacity of a country. What is important is that the people should understand the message. That is very, very critical. Next slide, please. So, and then after action report. So this is from Fiji, where they, after the disaster happened, they also tried to analyze how the early warning system performed. Did it work well? Were there gaps? And if so, what were the gaps? How should they be addressed? So doing an after action report after key disasters is also important. You need to understand whether the early warning system is working. And if it is not working, then you need to understand what needs to be fixed. So, so this is very important to do a review after the disaster. Next slide, please. Then we come to the tool. So we have two tools to show you today. One is the checklist, which has been developed under the Early Warning for All global initiative, and it is broken down into the four pillars. And let's go to the next slide, then you'll see what it looks like. So, so it has questions, or what we call indicators, and these indicators unpack the meaning of early warning for all to everyone. Next slide. And here is the checklist, and you are going to work on it today. We are going to just have a look at it also. So first question you see, is there a clear policy and legislative framework in place for development of early warning systems? So 1.1 is there, it asks that question. And then there is a drop down menu. It shows does not apply. It's not available, partially available, available. So it's what is known as a Likert scale, and it helps you to determine where are your gaps. So for example, if you say partially available or not available, that means there's a gap. And then this helps to prioritize your actions so that you know how to where to focus when you want to improve your early warning systems. Next slide. Again, these are just more examples. Next slide. And yeah, so these are all just the examples of the early warning indicators, which can help you to develop, to identify gaps and help develop an action plan. Next slide. Then we have what we call the early warning systems addendum to the disaster resilience scorecard for cities. Now, again, here, when we say for cities, we mean all subnational governments. So there was a question in the Q&A about district councils. Yes, that is included. These tools are applicable to anything which is subnational. Next slide, please. And this is what it looks like. It is freely available on our website, and you can download and use it whenever you want. It is self-explanatory to the most extent. So it has explanations on how to use it. So if you want to use it, you're free to download and start using it. Next slide. And again, this has a number of questions or indicators, and then space for the answers where you can score from 0 to 3, 0 being no, we don't have, and 3 being yes, we have. And then also a place to put the actions and who is responsible, and so on. So actions are very important because the actions will help develop the action plan. So for example, when you do the scoring, if you find something which is 3, you're quite good. But if it's 0, 1, or 2, let's say, it means it needs attention. Then if there are 2 indicators, one is scored 2 and the other is 1. So obviously the one which is 1 needs more attention, and you should develop the actions quickly for that. Next slide. So it has 40 questions, 0 to 3. And it's broken down into the 10 essentials of the making cities resilient. So the 10 essentials, there was one question about that also. So basically it is more like, let's say, 10 sections or 10 sectors. So there is one focusing on infrastructure, there's one focusing on nature-based solutions, ecosystems, one focusing on societal capacity, one focusing on institutional capacity. So these are different sectors. So it's simply a sorting mechanism. To help break it down so that the tasks of working on the scorecard can also be broken down. Next slide. So again, I think that's what I just explained. So 10 essentials, some issues are on governance, some are on knowledge, some are, so this is how the 10 essentials link with the early warning for all components. Next slide. So now looking at the indicator again. So essential 1 is organizing for resilience. So it's a governance issue. And the question is, are multi-hazard early warning systems integrated into existing DRR plans or into new DRR plans? So again, the scoring 0, 1, 2, and 3. 3 being yes, everything is perfect, and 0 being nothing. So depending on what you score, and we will do this exercise just in a few minutes. Depending on what you score, you understand, okay, there is a gap and I need to address this gap. So then you write the actions and make an action plan. But if you score a high figure, it depends. Again, it's a subjective tool. So you usually use it in a multi-stakeholder group, large group. And when you do the scoring, it depends government to government. Some make an action plan for anything 2 and below. Some make an action plan for anything 1 and below. So it's for the government to decide. Depending on how much resources you have, what capacity you have, can make a decision. So for example, if you say only 1 and below, it will be a very focused plan, which you can say, okay, we will do this in 2 years. After this, we will focus on whatever is 2. So that is one way of doing it. It's fine. There's no right or wrong methodology. It's just depending on your capacity and the resources available to you. Next slide. So now we will do the exercise. So what we will do is we will have some questions come up on the Slido, and we'll have 5 indicators coming up, and you will do a scoring. It's up to you, but you can use whatever knowledge you have of your immediate area, your community, your city, or your government, and score according to that. And then what we will do is we will try to see so you identify gaps out of these 5. And then from those 5, we will try to identify which is the most important gap. So of course, it's not going to be an easy exercise because we have today more than 1,000 participants, but it will be an interesting just to see, what's the key gap area. And then we will ask you to develop 2 or 3 actions that you can take to address those gaps. So for example, if you say that the early warning system is not available in one of the local languages, that is the gap. So the actions could be to establish a committee to look at this issue. The committee, second action could be the committee will translate to the concerned local language. Third action could be to test out with the community to ensure that the message is clear. And then a fourth action could be to adopt it in the early warning system. So these are some of the possible actions. In the chat, I think the link has been shared. So have a look at that. So next slide. Yeah, so now you have to use the Slido app. And there it is. You just scan the QR code and the hashtag 6021791. The question is, are early warning systems integrated into the existing TRR plans or into new or in the new plans under development? So are they integrated into the plans? Okay, so we see how people are voting. So it's 0, 1, 3, 2. 3 is the best, of course, but 2 is coming out to be the most important one. And 2 says that they are partially addressed in city and DRR plans. So about, I think we can stop now and move to the next one. So about 47% are rating, 46% are rating 2, 30% 3, and 20% 1. So you get an idea, right? How this works. If you do it, suppose you in the group, you would do it with all ministries or departments of your office. Again, to what extent is indigenous, traditional, or local knowledge integrated into the risk assessments? So here in the last one, remember 3 was 2 was top and 3 was second. Here 3 is top and 1 is coming up very fast. So 1 means that there is a big gap and 1 is now on the top. So 1 is that means there is a big gap. So this is something which requires attention and action. Let's go to the next. To what extent do communities receive, understand, and act upon warning information? So again, 3 says 75%, 2 says 50%, and 1 says less than 50%. And of course, there is 0, that there is no measure, there is no means to measure it, that they are receiving the information and acting on it. So again, here we identify a big gap because the score 1 is the highest. So that means there is a lot of, we need actions. The action plan should address this indicator. So now these indicators, if you see, we were looking at question from 1, then, so we are looking at 1 question from each of the key areas. Let's go to the next then. So are there established processes to ensure the maintenance of detection and monitoring and response infrastructure for effective early warning? So meaning basically in simple language, are resources made available to maintain all of these early warning systems? Again, 1 is the highest, so it's showing a big gap. That means even if you have early warning systems, you need resources to maintain it. For example, there was a report some time ago about the tsunami buoys in the Indian Ocean, that many of them are non-functional. So again, if we don't maintain the systems, then we're not going to get the early warning. Okay, so this is again a big gap area. So later what we will try to do is, out of all these gaps, which one do you want to prioritize? But that's a later exercise. Right now, we again look at our communication and dissemination systems in the city. Its city again can mean your district council, can mean your state, your province, anything designed to meet the needs of different groups. So again, this is looking at inclusion and trying to see if most vulnerable groups are covered or not. Meaning, are we able to give dissemination? Are we able to communicate early warning to senior citizens who are living alone, or to persons with disabilities who may be living alone? So how will we ensure that communication is done to them? So again, so this highest is score 2. So this you can say, it could be a priority later, but maybe you don't have to prioritize in this action plan. For example, this action plan can focus on anything which is 1 or 0. Next. Okay. So now what we want you to do is, you've done 5 indicators and you've done some scoring on that. Now we want you to vote for that one gap that you consider the top priority. Yes, you will get the recording of these sessions also, and all the material is already available. So, so these are the indicators. So which ones did you score the lowest? And out of those, which one would you prioritize the most for action? So vote again through Slido. Which one needs most urgent attention out of these 5? More and more people should participate. Okay, so I think interesting. So what it shows is that the capacity to receive and act upon the early warning information is very critical. and a gap that needs to be addressed. And then secondly, it's the maintenance of the systems. So, so this reflects, I think, the urgent priorities of all the subnational entities. So then next, what we will do is we will ask you to spend some time. So you saw the lowest ranked priority was that the message reaches the people and they know how to respond to it. And the second one was on the so let's keep it on the first one. The message reaches the people and they know how to respond to it. What are two actions that you would take to address this gap? Let's spend some time on that. So you can just write some words. What two actions you would do to address this gap? Some people have already started typing. Good. Collaboration. Awareness, to increase the awareness and to educate the people on how to understand. Very good. Capacity building, to build the capacity of the communities, to integrate in the school curriculum. That's very interesting. Do some research. That's also important. IEC. And then the comms, of course. So awareness, education, capacity building, and collaboration. These are the centers. Stakeholder engagement is also important, to involve others, because to improve the understanding of the messages, it's not just awareness, but you can also include the thought leaders of the community or the faith leaders and so on. They can also help. Okay. So what we have done now? So what we have done is we looked at tool. We looked, and these tools have indicators. So indicators, they help to unpack the concept, right? They break down the concept, because it's very easy to say resilience or risk reduction or early warning, but what does it mean? So the indicators help you to understand what it means, what it is trying to achieve. Then you use those indicators to identify gaps. Then you prioritized amongst those gaps. So what was the lowest scoring? You said, let's tackle that first. And then you started building an action plan. And these are basically the components of the action plan to help address that gap. So this could be an action plan for 1 year or 2 years, depending on what kind of resources you have. But you have an action plan, you integrate it. Somebody asked about financing. Well, financing for all of these activities comes not from a separate budget, it comes from your development budget. That's where it comes from. There are donor funding available. There is the Green Climate Fund, which has some funding available. But what we have seen, even for post-disaster, but pre-disaster, most of the budgets come from the countries themselves. And it comes from your development budget. So early warning, for example, should be part of your civil defense system, or it is part of your development budget, because it is saving lives. Not only lives, it is saving assets, because when you have the early warning, you can save your fishing boats, for example, you can save your equipment, you can save your livestock, you can save your homes. So all of this is possible if you have the early warning. So again, mostly it comes from the development budget. So let's now. So there are various means of using the scorecard, but most importantly, what the scorecard does is helps to break silos. It brings the different departments together, and they are able to work together and understand each other's needs. And also it helps the city or let's say the subnational unit to prioritize. So like the exercise you just did, you prioritized. So suppose you did it over a 3-day, 4-day with all your sectors together, you can understand what kind of an action plan you would develop. It would be very comprehensive. It would be very realistic, very practical, and it could lead to actions which will have great impact. So next slide. And this also helps to develop your project pipeline, because when you have articulated the gaps, the actions, the responsibilities, the budget, that is a project preparation. So there are a number of other tools available apart from the scorecard on early warning. So we have one on public health systems, on food systems, on cultural heritage. Next slide. Also for inclusion of persons with disability, on climate resilience, on disaster displacement. Next slide. And then there are some which are under development right now. For example, climate resilience in the education sector, gender inclusion, and so on. Next. So with that, I end my presentation, and I think I've tried to answer some of the questions that came up. I think we have about 5 minutes.
So we have about 5 minutes indeed, Sanjaya.
Yeah, so let me,
Any questions coming in?
There is one question on the due to self-assessment, is there requirement to provide evidence? So the evidence, you don't have to provide to anybody outside. The self-assessment is for that government to use, right? You don't have to show it to us. You don't have to show it to anybody. But you should write what is the source or the means of verification, because then sometimes, after 3 or 4 years, you might not be there. Somebody else will be there. They'll look at the score and say, why did they score like this? So if you have the means of verification, that would help. Then will the results of this workshop be shared? I think, yeah, you will have the recording of this. I think does the norm MHEWS refer to well, it refers to multi-hazard early warning systems. And what is important is that the early warning system should to cover all kinds of hazards, not just, because sometimes you have early warning for floods only in a country. But you also have landslides, you have fires, you have earthquakes. So you should have early warning systems for that also. How to implement early warning for all in fragile and conflict and violence affected countries. So this is actually becoming more and more a priority. For example, the Green Climate Fund is prioritizing underserved countries, but also fragile and conflict impacted countries. And there are a number of agencies which are involved in that. There's also a question on where can we download the checklist. So these tools, what we can do is we can share the checklist with you. So we have a shared space where we will put all the materials, including the PowerPoint, and we'll put the checklist also there. The scorecard you can download even now. My colleagues can put the link. The multi-hazard scorecard, it's available on our website. So yes,
so
there are
sorry, just to confirm about the multi-hazard early warning scorecard, it is available in the participants folder, which we shared for this workshop. It is not yet available online, but it will be in the coming weeks. So in the meantime, you can use the pilot version, which is in the folder. And my colleagues have just posted the links in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah. And then there is, within these indicators, there any way to integrate local wisdom? Yes, there is. That's why there is a multi-stakeholder discussion. And it's very important to see if there are any, of course, check them scientifically, the local wisdom. It should be scientifically also accurate. But it is important to hear everything and evaluate and integrate. How challenging is it to make people respond to early warning? So yes, it requires practice. So that's why you saw the Solomon Islands example where the children are doing the drill. So they are learning how to respond to the early warning. So if you just say that, a siren will sound and you need to evacuate, that's not enough. You need to give some more instructions, and you also need to do some drills. So for example, in Korea, there is one day every year when they practice all over the country at the same time. The sirens go and they practice all the procedures that they need to do. And in the buildings, we practice about at least twice a year. We do the early warning and then the evacuation and everything. So that is something which has to be instilled, which has to be done regularly. There is what measures should be taken globally to raise awareness, to understand the early warning messages. So again, practice, education. I think many of these you already mentioned when we did the action planning. So capacity building, awareness, communication, IEC, all of these measures should be taken. But most important is to educate the people what to do, and also to make sure that the early warning messages are clear. So just a siren by itself will not be enough. That's why there is the common alerting protocol, which gives some explanation and understanding about what is happening and what you need to do. So bringing together diverse departments in government is difficult. How can country programs bring these synergies? So again, yes, it is very difficult. I've worked in government 17 years, and I know how difficult it is for one government department to talk to another. So where it comes together generally is either at the chief executive's level, so like the mayor's office can ensure that, or the chief's office, or the chief minister, the governor. At that level, it can come together by creating a multi-department committee. That's the way it can happen. And then also we have seen that where these scorecards have been used with multi-department gathering, it has helped to break down the silos and has helped to make people understand better how they need to work together. So then there is a question, is there any reporting tool that can capture real-time affected population? Well, there are some tools which use AI to monitor through the cell phones how people are responding. So I've seen one of the demos of this in Japan. And so if there is an early warning, then they are monitoring through the cell phone, because the cell phone movement can be monitored. So they see whether, how many in bulk, how many people are actually responding to the early warning and how many are not. So there are these tools available, especially through the mobile phones. So that is something which needs to be worked out for with the telecom providers. There's also, can you provide a link for the early warning resources? So I'm sure that is there in the resources page. What is the appreciation of indigenous early warning systems? I'll give you one example, and I think this is the last one I'll be able to do today. In Banda Aceh, when the Indian tsunami hit, 220,000 people died. But an island just south, right in the path of the tsunami, just south of Banda Aceh, In that island, there was a legend, a myth, that when the water boils, the water gods are angry and you should move to higher ground. So when before the tsunami, the water recedes, when that water receded, the villagers saw that, they remembered their legend, they moved to the top of the hill, and when the tsunami happened, not one of them was injured or killed. So again, indigenous knowledge is needs to be accounted for, but needs to be scientifically checked. That it is actually it is correct and relevant. But yes, you need to ensure that it's collected and then integrated when relevant. I think my time is up, so I will end now here. So thank you for your attention. Try to answer as many questions as possible. Some I will type. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjaya, for the excellent presentation and the replies to the so many questions we have been receiving. I would also like to thank all our participants for the amazing levels of participation. We are monitoring all your questions. We are trying to answer them in writing as well as during the session. Our colleagues have also posted multiple resources online. You will receive, as part of this training package, file which contains links to relevant publications, as well as to the Prevention Web platform, which includes many useful resources, tools, guidance, and case studies from different countries on the many topics that you have addressed, from gender inclusion to disability inclusion, early warning systems, the difference between resilience and DRR. You will find a lot of information there, inclusion of civil society organizations as well. So please do check out these tools that and resources that we have shared with you, and we hope that they will answer many of your questions. And some of the questions that have been raised will also be addressed in the second part of our session. So the ones that were related to gender responsive early warning systems, how to establish those, this will be covered by our colleagues from UN Women, who will be joining after the short break. So here are a few resources again, and there will be much more posted in the participants folder. So with that, I would like to conclude UNDR as part of the session, and the next part will be introduced by our colleagues from UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality. Ms. Wu Huangli, who's the gender training specialist, and she will be introducing the key concepts, frameworks, and tools related to gender responsive disaster risk reduction and early warning systems. So for now, we will take a short break, about 10 minutes. We would actually like to ask you to please come back by 3:55 Korean time. So you're all in very different zones, but let's take 8 minutes, please. Be back in 8 minutes, and that would be 3:55 in Korea. So thank you so much, and we will see you after the short break.
Dear participants, kindly note that the attendance link is currently being shared through the chat box right now. Thank you.
Instructions put on the back. Huh? And from Seoul. We will start the session now. I'm Lee, and I'm Gender Training Specialist at UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality based in Seoul, the Republic of Korea. So I will be with you in the next 1 hour, and we will focus on gender responsive DRR and gender responsive early warning system. Next slide, please.
Colleagues, we would like to invite you back into our session, which will be led by UN Women.
You have to turn on the movie.
So please come back and we will start right away. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from Seoul, the Republic of Korea. I am Lee from the UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality based in Seoul. So I will be spending 1 hour with you in the next 1 hour, and we will focus on gender responsive disaster risk reduction and early warning system. In the beginning of the session today, let us stand together to understand the concept of gender responsive disaster risk reduction and the international commitment in 30 minutes. And then the rest 30 minutes we will spend for gender responsive early warning system. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the next 30 minutes, we will together understand the linkage between gender human rights, disaster risk reduction, the concept of gender responsive disaster risk reduction, and the international commitment to accelerate gender equality in disaster risk reduction, and some examples. So to begin, I want to share with you some word about UN Women. Its full name is United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and Empowerment of Women. This is United Nations entity charged with working on gender equality and the empowerment of women. We also advocate for the rights of women and girls and focusing on a number of issues, including violence against women and violence against LGBT people. So through the Women's Resilient to Disaster Program, which UN Women's signature on gender equality accelerator in disaster risk reduction, UN Women work at the global, regional, and local level to contribute in closing gender gap in early warning system and promoting explicit consideration of gender dimension of risk, impacts, need, capacity, and ability to meaningfully participate, to lead, and influence decision-making in all elements of early warning system. So through this program, we also implement gender action plan for the Sendai framework, which is adopted in March this year. So currently, we are active in this area in 61 countries, and of course, also focus on increasing gender responsive early warning system, early warning in disaster risk reduction and resilient policy framework. So through our program, more than 1,000 women organizations have been empowered to contribute to gender responsive policy change, early warning system, resilient livelihood, and disaster risk and needs assessment. Through our knowledge hub on women knowledge and expertise on 18region is raised as the most disaster-prone region in the world, followed by the Caribbean region. Like women across the world, women face
disability, race, sexual orientation, income, geography, and additional socio-economic factors, which work to shape the extent of vulnerability and expose that one experience. So the evidence shows that women and girls are the most vulnerable to disaster due to preceding inequality during crisis. Women have uneven level of resilience and capacity in disaster and recovery. They suffer higher losses in livelihood, and their economic opportunity post-disaster are more severely impacted than men. Not only women and girls suffering more, but they are also missing from the table when it's come to make decisions, making policy and creating solutions, despite their spread-heading solutions at the community level. Next slide, please. So this data presents how women are disproportionately affected by disaster, are more likely to die in disaster, have different and even level of resilience and capacity to recover. So this research showed 141 countries over the period 1981 to 2002 highlight higher disaster mortality among women and girl deaths at an earlier age due to disaster. This is due to socio-economic and gender-specific inequality. So differences in impact of disaster are related to underlying gender inequality and socio-economic context embedded within the country and the disaster occurs. So the specific impact change between the context, but in gender inequality and socio-economic context is often the underlying driver. So poverty is the key underlying factor affecting the impact of disaster, affecting underlying resilience and capacity to cover. Poverty is gender and significantly related to other vulnerabilities, education, age, marriage status, and disability. So it's very important to understand the intersectionality when we talk about the vulnerability of disaster. Next slide. Okay, so this is showing you the example of how gender's nature of disaster. So for example, woman hardship as the result of disaster, it has burden on women, increased during disaster, increased health insecurity, the limit asset of women and girls, person with disability, LGBT person, and other vulnerable groups to information and decision making, as well as disaster management process. And violence against women and girls and children aggravate during the disaster. So how we define gender responsive disaster risk reduction? Next slide, please. So in the CEDAW, the Committee of the Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the General Recommendation 37 is actually very important for us in understanding this concept. It says, well-designed disaster risk reduction and climate change initiative that provide for the full and effective participation of women can advance substantive gender equality and the empowerment of women, while ensuring that the sustainable development, disaster risk reduction, and climate change objectives are achieved. So it's very important to highlight that the disaster risk reduction only are gender responsive if it provides the full and effective participation of women to advance substantive gender equality and the empowerment of women. Okay, so now let's go together to understand the international commitment to accelerate gender responsive disaster risk reduction. Next slide, please. Next. So this slide you also have seen in the previous slide presented by UNDRR expert. And it shows all the milestones on the DRR, the global meeting and event, international commitment related to disaster risk reduction. Next slide, please. And the various global conferences, such as the UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction under the Sendai Framework on DRR, World Humanitarian Summit, Paris Agreement on COP, all these documents see gender equality as the precondition for enable the sustainable development. Now let's go to a very specific international commitment for gender and disaster risk reduction. So you can see, so we will go to this very quickly, and it's very important for you to understand this framework. So first we talk about the Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So this, and specifically, is recommendation 37 on disaster risk reduction. So this is a kind of legally binding treaty. Of course, some countries in the ASEAN, for example, have not adopted this, but this is a very important document. So what is the general recommendation 37 is very important because it provides us some kind of definition on how the gender responsive disaster risk reduction should look like. And it's also important to note that the country need to ensure that gender equality and the empowerment of women are central to disaster risk management and humanitarian response. And this has to be reported in the universal periodic review. Another international framework we also have to look at, which is the Agenda for Humanity. So this is a 5-point plan that outlines the change need to alleviate suffering, reduce risk, and lessen vulnerability on the global scale. Display humanity, people's safety, dignity, and the right to thrive at the heart of global decision making. So in this agenda for humanity, it's very important to look at the principle of leaving no one behind, which there is about empowerment and protect women and girls. There is no video. Can you check? They say there's no video. Okay, someone is listening to it. So under the agenda for humanity, there is a principle under the leaving no one behind, and under that, gender equality, the empowerment and protect women and girls is very important. So it has 4 elements: the full and equal participation of women. Previous slide, please. The decision making must become the standard for all actors. Access to livelihood and opportunity. And the last one, which is very important, is about providing women and adolescent girls with comprehensive sexual and reproductive health. Another framework, when we are talking about Sendai framework on DRR, which that's already mentioned in the previous session, is also very important to highlight the HEAL framework for action for the period 2005 to 2015. So this also highlights the gender perspective should be integrated in all disaster risk management policy, plan, and decision-making process, including those related to risk assessment, early warning, information management, and education and training. So under the Sendai framework, 4 key priorities, which already presented in the first session, here, I just want to focus on how gender has been so important for the Sendai framework. So we know that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by disaster and threats, including climate change. So this is due to very specific barrier and inequality. And third, very important, on women active leadership and meaningful inclusion in all the 4 Sendai framework priorities is extremely critical for developing the resilient to shock. So a very good news that a year after the day of adoption of the global blueprint for disaster risk reduction, the Sendai framework, in March this year, the UN DRR have launched the Gender Action Plan to support the implementation of the Sendai framework for DRR. It's known as Sendai GAP. So this action plan supports the government and other stakeholders to reduce negative impacts of gender discrimination and inequality in disaster. If you have time to look at this document, this is very action-oriented. So this Sendai Gender Action Plan aims to accelerate the implementation of the Sendai framework by substantially increase resource allocation, activity, impact of gender responsive disaster risk reduction, and substantially decrease gender-released disaster risk by 2030. Okay, so now let me invite you to watch a 2-minute video that can quickly introduce you about the Sendai Gender Action Plan.
Sex, age, income, disability, disability. 2. Use gender analysis for decision. Priority 2. Strengthen disaster response to manage disasters. 3. Integrate gender equality disaster response strategies and institutions. 4. Empower women in disaster risk governance. Priority 3. Invest in disaster risk reduction and resilience. 5. Mainstream gender equality investments in disaster risk reduction and risk-informed development. 6. Boost funding for disaster risk reduction initiatives that advance gender equality. Priority 4. Enhance disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. 7. Implement gender-responsive and inclusive early warning systems. 8. Plan for and invest in gender-responsive disaster recovery and reconstruction. 9. Ensure access to sexual and reproductive health rights and prevent gender-based violence in disaster contexts.
Ensuring inclusivity is a collective responsibility. It means we need to work on systematic inequalities, accountability, and resilience for everyone.
Join us in implementing the Sendai Gender Action Plan to advance gender equality in disaster risk reduction.
Okay, so I hope this video gives you a quick understanding on the framework of the Gender Action Plan. Another document that we also refer, which is about the Agenda 2030, which is the Sustainable Development Goal. So there are 55 targets related to DRR in 10 of the 17 SDG. So this firmly establishes the role of disaster risk reduction as the core development policy. And SDG 11 and SDG 13 seek gender equality in urban resilience and climate change and DRR action. SDG 16 called for elimination of all forms of violence against women and children in normal time and enduring conflict. And further, they intersect with gender across 17 SDGs. So it is very clear that gender-responsive disaster risk reduction as an accelerator for the Sustainable Development Goal. Why are we saying that? Because disaster and conflict accelerate by climate change, gender inequality, putting women and girls at risk, and can stop the will of the SDG. The will of SDG will only move ahead and secure development again if it takes into account the needs and capacity of women, girls, boys in disaster management. Therefore, gender-responsive disaster risk reduction as an accelerator. So in this chart, we present to you the linkage between Sendai, target, and the SDG. What I want to highlight in this slide is that the DRR cut across different aspects and sectors of development. However, there is an aspect of the action target that emphasizes strengthening the role of women and girls in the context of the DRR. And it's evident that this is very critical in achieving the goal of gender equality and the empowerment of women and building disaster resilient and community. So there is something we still need to continue to advocate to have better gender responsive DRR. Another point I want to mention, which is also about the Sendai framework, is that the target E of the Sendai framework, which is about the development of the national and local strategy for DRR to be achieved by 2020. Set some progress on the target E.1 on national strategy. However, the local DRR strategy remains dismal. The point I want to highlight here is that there is also lack of clarity on to what extent this national and local strategy for DRR are gender responsive. Third, there is actually an opportunity for women machinery and many women organizations to review this policy. So when we refer to disaster risk reduction, it's also important for us to know about the interagency standing committee policy on gender equality and empowerment of women and girls in humanitarian action. Why this is important? Because this is this action plan was endorsed in 2017 by the working group, and it also have responsible for the drafting annual report on gender accountability framework to document its achievement and lesson learned. So when you look at this, it gives you a lot of idea on how gender responsive have been taken in DRR in some countries. The G20 Ministerial Conference on Women Empowerment Chair Statement. So this is also a very important reference document that you can consider. It also highlights that the commitment in advancing gender in disaster risk reduction. So in some countries, so next slide, please. So there is also, I also leave here in the PowerPoint, there are some documents at the sub-regional level, which is quite good example of how gender have been addressed in the DRR for new consideration. So for example, the Asia Regional Plan on implementation of the Sendai framework, the Asia Pacific Action Plan, and also, of course, at the country level, you also mentioned about the national and policy and gender policy and plan. Now let's look at, because we have quite a limited time, so let's look at the UN Women Initiative for Gender and Climate Action on what has been done on this area. So UN, as we share from the beginning, we have been doing a lot of intervention in more than 60 countries to support gender responsive DRR. Is, for example, be part working on different countries to implement different models. And these are some examples that we can share with you. So, for example, I'm empowering women leader to the National Emergency Response Team training in Fiji. So this intervention focuses on addressing the capacity gap that women have at the community level. For example, access and understanding of the scientific information on disaster preparedness. And it's very important that it's really engage women leaders to build awareness and capacity for women lead collection and the analysis of the data. Another example on women leading DRR initiative in Vietnam. So Vietnam is ranked as the 12th country in the highest level of exposed to natural disaster. What they do with that, they have come up with a policy that ensures that there is official space for women union in the decision making toward the Committee of Natural Disaster Prevention and Control. So this means that women leaders have a space at the table to make decisions and provide their perspective for planning action during the region. Okay, so now let us look at a very short video on the Pacific woman resilient to disaster. So this video will feature a story of women in Fiji, Vanuatu, and Kiribati.
I saw the impact of climate change in Kiribati. That's when I decided that I'm going to bring about a change in the lives of my people. We had a cyclone before, and we really suffered from it. So we learned a good lesson from those past cyclones. Tropical cyclone hurricane, I really prepared everything for my family. When Winston came, it took everything from us. It also took our market, something that the women of reproductive rely on. Their livelihood. I am very passionate about bee farming. I manage my bee farm on my own. Because of this climate change, the weather pattern is changing, which is affecting the production level of honey. If we are to empower the amazing thing is there are more women like me in Kiribati today that are building resilient communities. Women everywhere are very resilient.
So thank you. That is ending my first presentation on gender responsive DRR. Now, let's together look at the concept of gender responsive early warning system. Okay, so following the previous question, previous session, how do we do better? We know that women and men, girl and boy, and other gender group experience disaster in different ways, and the vulnerability level are different. Because this is due to existing inequality as well as the society role. Women are placed at a greater risk through a lack of timely and relevant information about hazards through ineffective early warning system. So, for example, women often have less access to technology that early warning systems are delivered with cell phone or data package. But even in a situation where there is equal access to the device, through which messages are provided, there is often less of empowerment of women to act quickly on that message. For example, the ability to leave place of employment on the basis of message to collect children, supply, and get back to home. So as such, women have opportunity to participate as the leader and designer of early warning system. The resulting system are proven to be more accessible and effective for all. So we know that inclusive early warning systems are the key component of the disaster risk reduction, which must include the meaningful participation and leadership of women and girls to strengthen our collective resilience and in doing so, have accelerated progress toward achieving the Sendai Framework objective on DRR and the Sendai Gender Action Plan objective on implementing gender-responsive and inclusive end-to-end multi-hazard early warning system and anticipatory action. The success of the early warning system relies on a foundation of trust and strong connection between the implementer and the community that they seek to reach. This comes with the need for strong ownership and buy-in, and more inclusive and tailored an early warning system into the local context, the more likely it is to be effective. So what we know, the gap and action. There is many gaps that need to be addressed. So there are many challenges currently impacting inclusive disaster risk reduction and resilience. For example, barrier to engage for women and women organization, lack of updated population information, and such as disability, disaggregated data, and lack of engagement with gender analysis in existing early warning system. So what action we can take to address this gap? So for UN Women, approach toward this area of work is very much informed by extensive evidence we have that a whole of society approach needed to be scaled up in developing inclusive early warning system, particularly in leveraging and empowering women and women organizations to share their experience, knowledge, and develop their expertise further. So this is already have been mentioned in the previous session, yeah? And here I just want to introduce to you that for UN Women, we have been develop a very specific checklist to help you to develop gender responsive early warning system and early action. So before we develop, then we again asking question why we need to include gender dimension. So we already talked about gender inequality, and we also highlight the importance of gender responsive data because we cannot understand gender inequality, cannot conduct the gender analysis to identify which group are vulnerable if we don't have and we are not able to conduct gender analysis. And a lack of gender perspective in dissemination and communication also show to accelerate the negative impact of disaster. So we also want to emphasize the woman involvement in early warning system is very important. It's increased the number of people informed because they are connected to different social networks, and women have specific and different communication strategy that consider women practice, concern, and need. So I received some questions on communication, and I will talk more about it when we talk about designing gender responsive early warning system. So in the context of an early warning system, it is very important to explicitly consider gender impact on vulnerability, participation, dissemination, response, and power and decision making. So before going to the specific tool, I invite you to watch a very short minute video on gender inclusive early warning system in India. So you can see that we are also showing you some of the guidance and checklist that can be very helpful when you understand that can help you to do the work on gender responsive early warning action system. So it is some document developed by the WMO, UNDRR, and UN Women. So this is very practical and can guide you. So here, I want to focus on a very simple checklist that developed by UN Women and is also under our global program on women resilient to disaster, and that have been used in many countries. So if you look at here, first, it's very important to invest on gender responsive data, forecast and warning, recognize that women and men assess, process, interpret, and respond to information in different ways, given the social and cultural organization of gender relation and gender division of labor. So if we are missing gender perspective in the dissemination and communication, it will accelerate the negative impact to gender. So what the checklist will guide you about? First, we have to acknowledge that there is gender impact. The impact to women, to men, to boy and girl, and to different groups are different. The access to resource when addressed, the disaster is also very different. So this is also very important in terms of conduct gender analysis, is to understand the livelihoods of people, how is its impact, and how it will likely to impact due to the disaster, and how people also access to information. And then the next step is the examine. So it's about understand how gender assumption, including stereotype, is actually impact when we disseminate information about early warning. Listen, this is about making proactive effort to hear from marginalized groups. And in this part, it's also very important to understand the intersectionality. It means that how different elements can make the vulnerable more impact. So then with the analysis of the intersectionality, we will better understanding the level of vulnerability, and then go to participation. How the participation of women, of men in different groups, even in the decision making, and so we better understand the power relation. And also understand the response, how the gender impact on the response side, and understand the power decision. So this is actually, so in the checklist, that can be a list of questions that can guide you in responding to the question and understand more about gender dynamic. Next slide, please. So, for example, we are showing you a video, an example here in the Philippines. And it's really, they are using a tool called missing boy methodology. So they gather the information to design an upcoming smart flood early warning system. And with the missing boy methodology, it will collect information that can help to mainstreaming gender activity.
These quotes reflect the lived experiences of gender minorities and marginalized individuals who are disproportionately affected by climate change and disaster impacts in Asia and the Pacific, which is home to some of the most disaster-prone areas in the world, including the Philippines. The mountain city facing a growing risk of flooding, Baguio City in the northern Philippines, has incorporated a gender-transformative approach in the design of its smart flood early warning system and flood information and mitigation measures. which is currently being developed with the help of the ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund, or AASCTF.
We talk about values, strategic vision of becoming a resilient city within the context of climate change and increased risk of flooding and natural disasters. Key to becoming a more resilient city is ensuring that we can better meet the needs of all our citizens, particularly those who are marginalized and vulnerable. So with the SCTF support, we identified this project to ensure appropriate, applicable, and timely early warning, which is the last one.
AASCTF partnered with global consulting firm Ramble and Practical Action Consulting for a study to identify the most vulnerable communities in Baguio. The study will help shape the design of the city's smart flood early warning system, which is currently being developed with the city of Baguio. The study applied Practical Action's UN Women-endorsed Missing Voices methodology, which utilized anonymous phone interviews to allow for open discussions with the most marginalized and vulnerable members of the Baguio community. Interviews were then combined with data from community surveys, interviews with local groups and government agencies, and supported by existing studies.
This approach gives insights into how gender affects people's experiences of floods and the flood early warning. With our Missing Voices interviews specifically, we were able to understand the experiences of people with intersecting vulnerabilities, such as women who are also Asians or who have a disability. A lot of the time, we have people who are in vulnerable, very marginalized communities or groups, and they can often be missing from the data because they are hard to reach in some way, or because they're not comfortable speaking with researchers. And when they receive the data, that means they receive the policies.
The report gave recommendations on 9 key areas, including that Baguio's early warning system should prioritize enhancing people's knowledge of flood risks to improve preparedness. To meet people's varying needs, the current one-size-fits-all approach to early warning needs to be modified, with separate warnings to be issued for weather forecasts, preparedness alerts, and evacuation instructions. And that gender vulnerabilities are important factors in setting up evacuation shelters, as study respondents cited concerns on safety, overcrowding, and lack of toilets and facilities in these centers. Disasters are not gender neutral. The needs and priorities of women and other marginalized groups are complex and diverse. Their voices must be heard when designing and implementing flood early warning systems to ensure the method works for everyone.
To continue with my presentation, I want to emphasize on 4 key elements of making early warning system more gender responsive. So first, which is about strengthening involvement of gender machinery, civil society organization. So why this is important? Because we see women organization as essential actor on the ground in disaster preparedness and in the design of inclusive early warning system. Engaging women group and other community-based organizations and local leaders and their existing network is the key to creating inclusive and accessible early warning systems that are enhanced by locally led information gathering and data collection. So therefore, UN Women, we are building women organization capacity and knowledge on early warning system, including, for example, to quarterly meeting that carry their our office hold with civil society, which always includes information about disaster risk, the early warning system. Strengthening the involvement of the gender machinery, women group, and other community-based organizations not only save time and resource, but also open communication channels that would be most effectively utilized in reaching certain population and sharing real-time information to support the continued improvement of an early warning system. This is very crucial to ensure that last mile communication and true end-to-end early warning system. Next slide. So another key element is about the participation and leadership of women. I would like to highlight that although women and girls are among the most vulnerable in disaster, they are also critical agents of change in disaster risk reduction and recovery. Nevertheless, their capacity, knowledge, and leadership remain unleveraged. Example of successful women-led early warning system rely on the engagement of local women and women organizations throughout their life cycle. So by including women from the inception phase, we can ensure the systems are intentionally designed with inclusion and practical for the local context in mind. In shaping early warning systems, they can translate that climate-related and disaster information into understandable action, including dissemination and community outreach. Women live experience and traditional knowledge enable them to contextualize this information in a way that makes the most sense for their community. The third element that I want to highlight, which is about communication and empowerment. So lastly, you have seen throughout this presentation, when we design accessible and inclusive early warning system, gender-responsive communication and empowerment is a key. Why? Because gender-responsive early warning system means that information is timely delivered and that everyone has access to the information and has received it, or that everyone can act based on that information received. To achieve this, we must consider the gender difference in risk perception, access to resource, respond to early warning system sign, as well as the language and accessibility barrier. Therefore, access to information and technology is essential to enhance women's agency and potential in disaster beyond traditional framing of women are just vulnerable victims. Women's full equal access to early warning system and leadership in early warning communication is crucial for developing inclusive and accessible early warning system. So as UN Women, we already support effort to create accessible and gender-responsive early warning system through our global program. Leveraging women's ability to meaningfully participate, lead, and influence decision-making in all elements of the early warning system and empower them in their resilience to disaster and so. There is also evidence of a multiplier effect of the benefit that result from advancing gender equality and women empowerment, which compound from the household to the community and upward to the national and global level. We have seen with early warning system, host development and implementation strongly integrate women leader and women organization. Yes. With that, I would like to end my presentation, and I now will looking at some of the questions that you are already know to UN Women. Okay. So there are some a list of questions for us. I think some of the question is already given before we make presentation. So I hope that during my our presentation, some of the question is already respond. Therefore, I will selecting some of the question that is I think we need in the response today. So for example, the question that what are the key challenges in integrate gender consideration into early warning systems? So you see that actually we have a lot of challenging. So the first challenging. So if we talk about early warning system, it is about how to understand how the message is reach people in a timely way. And the fact that women and men have different group in the society have different access to the resource, have different position of labor. So that's why the way they access to information can very much different. Right in the beginning of my presentation, we just share with you that Okay, let's reflect some information. Okay, so women have, as you can see, women often have less access to technology that early warning systems are delivered. For example, with cell phone. Even in a situation where there is equal access to device to which the messages are provided, there's often less empowerment of women among women to act quickly on such messages. For example, even they know the message, but they have to come back home, to collect their kids, or even take care of their old mother before aging people, so that they can live to the risk area. So there are a lot. The gender division of labor is actually will make a lot of factors that decide how women and men access to early warning system. So and also there is a discussion on the fact that women is actually not always in the table on disaster risk reduction. So, for example, in many cases, when people design an early warning system, they don't have space on the table to negotiate on how the early warning system would be. So you know that in many cases, the way that women access to information is very much different compared to men. So that's why in our presentation, we also highlight the fact that it is very important. This is very important to involve gender machinery, to involve women group, because they are the one who know much better on the situation of women in the very specific context. And that's why they can open that working with women organization, listen to the voice of women at the community level, can open communication channel that would be the most effectively utilized in reaching certain population and sharing real-time information to support continued improvement of early warning system. Yes. So that is, so we also have some question is also asking about the checklist. So we also will download this checklist so that you can continue, you can look at that in very detail. So there is also a question around about the media, the role of media play in disaster risk reduction and early. So this is actually very important because you know that first media play a very key role to shape the gender norms, to shape the understanding and reinforce gender inequality. So for example, media also can play a strong role in changing people understanding about the role of women, the importance of leadership of women in designing early warning system. But in many ways, media also can give the message that women are not in good capacity, women don't have experience, therefore women leadership is not needed. Therefore, a system that media is gender responsive and advocate for gender equality is very important. And that's why they also very important in disseminate early warning system. However, to make sure that the early warning system is inclusive and gender responsive, so you see it's very important for us to conduct a very detailed gender analysis. For example, whether this way of a very specific communication, whether it's work for all women. So for example, you know that in many communities, women are not accessing mobile phone, they are not accessing internet. So therefore, in case you are sending message to mobile phone may not the best way to work. So in some countries, they have a loudspeaker system, which is installed in every community. So the community is giving information to people through this system. So this very much depends on how we conduct the gender analysis to understand what kind of media that local people access and how media also can play a better role in promoting better gender equality norm, and also advocate and support women to share their own experience, to share their own view. Yes. So that is our response on the role of media. So as we share to you that UN Women, we have been supporting the implementation of the gender action plan on the DRR and the implementation of the Sendai framework. So we currently implement in more than 60 countries, yes. And we can share with you some of the results that telling you about our work, our lesson learned, and some of the reflection from our work. UN Women also work closely with UNDRR. Yeah. So UNDRR, our engagement is very much to contribute to make sure that the disaster risk reduction are gender responsive, responsiveness, and the intervention will advance the gender equality and the empowerment of women. Actually, through our presentation, I have mentioned about the Interagency Standing Committee policy on gender equality and the empowerment of women. So this is a primary mechanism for interagency coordination and humanitarian assistance. This is a unique forum involving the key UN and non-UN humanitarian partners. So in this process, the UN Women is actually developing a drafting annual gender accountability framework report to document the achievement, challenge, and documenting good practice with input from humanitarian coordination and the country team. So for us, for UN Women, we also working very closely with UNDRR in documenting lesson learned, proposing practice, and also promote different way of promoting practice that can advance the empowerment of women and women leadership into the disaster risk reduction and early warning system. How to measure progress from the government in fulfilling their commitments. So as I have shared with you from the beginning, we have some international commitment for gender equality. And for example, we did mention about the CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and it's named CEDAW. And under that, there is general recommendation on 37, which is specifically about disaster. So through the implementation of the CEDAW, the country who have signed the CEDAW, they have to prepare periodic report every 5 years. And in this report, they also have to mention how the country has strengthened its legal framework on mainstreaming gender into the DRR and the early warning system. So this is also a type of example. Additionally, as you know that there is gender action plan under the Sendai framework. So there can be a lot of forum, a lot of regional discussion to look at how countries have been implemented gender action plan. So for example, in some regional an example that we also show in our slide, in ASEAN country, the Association of Southeast Asia Nation, there is also a very specific program in addressing disaster risk reduction. And there is a very strong commitment on gender equality. So having this kind of strong framework on mainstreaming gender into the national, regional level is also a way of the government in fulfilling their commitment. Another way of measuring progress from the government in fulfilling their commitment is also looking at their data system. For example, whether their data system can tell us about how women and men, how other group, gender group are vulnerability to the disaster risk, yeah, and how because as we show to you, women and men are affected differently. So whether the government is invest money in establish a strong gender statistic system, which can tell us who is the vulnerable group and what kind of intervention can be. So that is also the commitment of the government. And for example, under the SDG 5, the 5C1 indicator, which is talking about how the government have a mechanism to track public expenditure for gender equality. So for example, they also, in some countries, they also have mechanism to track how much money we are spending in addressing disaster risk reduction that are gender responsive. It means that intervention specifically for gender responsive DRR is not reinforce gender inequality and how much money have been given for that. Yeah, so that is meant. So the example I shared to you is showing that there are a lot of ways that we can do in measuring the progress from the government in fulfilling their commitment on gender responsive DRR. Okay. There's some early warning system for disabled women. Yes, so far in the checklist, it just mentioned something about the different group with disability, but so far we don't have a separate guiding on women disabled. Gender-based education. Okay, so we talk about gender inequality. We talk about what are the reasons for gender equality, and the question is that gender-based education, should it be related to culture or it's just literacy? Okay, so gender norms is something that we learn from our community, from the social norm, and therefore the norms can be changed. The norms can be changed. Culture also can be changed. So it's very important to understand that the gender norm that create gender inequality is something we learn from the community. Therefore, we can build better norms to advance gender equality. We also can identify the norms that are harmful for gender equality, the norm that is not advanced, the participation of women and leadership in the community. So that's why this is very important, because when we talk about early warning system, when we're talking about gender responsive disaster risk reduction, we say that women don't have capacity, women cannot take lead through the education program, then that is actually reinforce gender inequality. So what they need to do is that we need to prove that no woman is specific through our education. We should tell the people that women have specific needs, men have specific needs, and we are experiencing the situation in different ways. For example, when the flood coming in, as a woman, I may experience of take caring my kids, and the aging people in my family completely different with my husband. So this difference have to be acknowledged. And then you build the education program to change the norms that can advance the people, woman participation. For example, we cannot say that women don't have experience to deal with this. Women owning small business, so they don't have voice in the family, in the community. Education. What I want to say is very important in terms of changing norms, social norms for gender equality, and build the woman leadership in the community in all areas, including disaster risk reduction and early warning system. How to ensure government implement policy that maintain gender responsive. Okay, so this is very important. As we see that we have a lot of global international commitment. And this is a responsibility. Once the government has endorsed it should implement. It should first, by making the law more gender responsive for women. So, for example, some countries doing is that they conduct gender analysis to understand who is impacted by disaster risk. So, for example, all the data I show you showing that women are in vulnerable position. Who is assessing the early warning system? Who is on the table to make decisions on early warning system and disaster risk reduction? How the budget is allocated to addressing this issue. So the government has a very strong role. But what I want to emphasize here is that first, their role in terms of making a strong legal framework to advance gender responsive DRR and early warning system. Secondly, as I have shared with you, is having the legal framework, but also have budget, have commitment for the implementation. What is happening often to gender is that we have a lot of plan, we have a lot of good strategy, but the implementation, the financing for it is very limited. Or in some countries, they make a very strong plan, they make a very strong commitment, but there's no budget allocation for that. That is also a very serious issue of gender, and that we are going to discuss in the third day of this training. And third, what we also have talked about is about the engagement of women and the woman machinery. For example, the Ministry of Gender Equality, the Ministry of Women Affairs in the implementation of in the design and implementation of the program, because they have their own experience. And the engagement of those ministries is very important in making sure that the policy are designed in a way that is gender responsive and advance gender equality. Okay, so we also have some see other question that I can respond. Women are important, but adolescents should also involve in it. Yes, you are right. You are right. However, we have shared with you, even when we look at the adolescent group, it is very important to understand the group of women and men. And as you see, especially in some international agreement that we have mentioned, is one of the principles is also ensure about the reproductive health and service for women and girls, and also the adolescent group. So this is because they have different needs. Yeah, so the engagement of the adolescent group is very important. But here I also want to emphasize that it's also important for us to disagree this group by different gender, because they may have different needs and their experience on the disaster and engagement in the early warning system can be very much different. And that's why we are talking about gender responsive. So the thing is that when we asking about gender responsive, a lot of people is asking why we are talking about women, where there is man, why there is no man in the discussion that we have. So this is also very important, because what is showing to us is that more women is vulnerable more than men. And also women are not having space in the discussion and making policy. But a man is also very important partner in this process. The engagement of men, the support of male leadership in this process is actually very important, because in many cases where there is a good implementation of quota for women in participation in different areas where make decision is actually due to the support from the male leadership. So I also want to emphasize the engagement of men and boys to advance gender equality. Okay, so with that, I would like to end our Q session today. I think that we thank you very much for giving us a lot of questions. They are very interesting. Some of the questions that specifically go to the PowerPoint, we try to include all the information as much as possible. We thank you a lot for your interest, and we wish to continue the conversation with all of you on this very important agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you for this very insightful presentation. Unfortunately, we did experience some sound issues, but the presentation will be made available online. So we invite participants also to consult the slides and reach out in case of any additional questions. And as before, we have also been posting a lot of useful resources that you can explore for further understanding the different topics that we have addressed today. So with this, we are closing in on our program, and we will now move to the final session, to the final part of our session, which is an interactive quiz. So we know you have all been intensely listening and learning a lot. So now is really the time for you to practice these different concepts and points that that we have explored. For this, we will go back to Slido. So I will just set it up in a second. All right. So I hope you can all see my slides. And for this session, I would like to invite my co-facilitator, Ms. Wana Cha, who's Gender and Climate Change Consultant at UN Women at the Center of Excellence for Gender Equality in Seoul. So let us start. First, please use your mobile phones or your browser to join Slido. I'll give a few seconds for many of you to join. This is a great opportunity for you to come back to the different notions that we've explored today and all these different concepts. And also to have a little bit of fun after so many presentations. Okay, I'll give a few more seconds. All right, we have about 400, close to 50 participants, so that's about half of our group. So please continue joining. Okay, and I will start with the first question now. The question is, true or false? Disasters are a natural phenomenon and the impacts are beyond human control. So that's something we've explored in the very first session. Please, we have 15 seconds remaining, so please hurry and provide your answers. Okay, so let's see what we have. So 66% said false and 34% thought it was true. So what is the correct answer? It is false, because disasters, of course, are not a natural phenomenon. They occur when a hazard event, like an earthquake, for example, or a flood, seriously disrupts the functioning of a society. And it's a function of exposure and vulnerability along with the hazard. Okay, so disasters are not natural. Next question. I would like to invite Wana, please, for this one.
Number 2, true or false?
Disasters have a differentiated impact on men, women, and other gender groups. Time's up, and I'm happy that we have a majority of those saying true. Disasters are certainly not gender neutral. Gender inequalities which exist in every society result in a gender differentiated disaster impact. The discrimination to impact the control that women and girls have over the decisions that governs their lives, as well as their access to resources and opportunities, which heightens exposure to risk and can result in disasters having disproportionate impact on women and girls. Next question, Dasha. Okay, so which of the following international commitments specifically advance gender responsive disaster risk reduction? Wow, that's amazing. Thank you very much for listening to us. Yes, indeed. Number 2, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction that runs until 2030 specifically targets disaster risk reduction through a comprehensive international approach. It was adopted in 2015, and despite the other conventions that we shared, the Convention on the Right of the Child, Beijing Platform for Action, Paris Agreement, only the Sendai Framework directly addresses disaster risk reduction. So well done, everyone. Give yourself a clap on the backs.
Thank you, Juana. The next question, number 4. True or false, early warning systems are a proven, effective, and feasible disaster risk reduction measure? So we have 700 people participating. This is really great. Thank you so much. So 5 seconds to provide your answer. Okay, so what do we have? True. Wow, excellent. All right. So that is indeed the correct answer. One of the most effective ways to reduce disaster impact is to have an effective multi-hazard early warning system in place, which can allow people to take early action to reduce risk. And we do have evidence suggesting that countries who report good coverage of multi-hazard early warning systems have lower disaster-related mortality rates compared to other countries, and also fewer economic impacts and impacts on infrastructure damage. All right, so our next question, number 5. Which target of the Sendai Framework for DRR aims to substantially increase the availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems? All right, let's see your answers. Oh, this is very varied. Okay, well, the correct answer is target G of the Sendai Framework, is the one that aims to substantially increase the availability and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information. And it's a compound indicator that looks into the different components of multi-hazard early warnings. And so many of you chose target D. So target D is actually focuses on the substantive reduction of damage to critical infrastructure. And target B, also quite a few responses. So that one is about reducing the number of affected people, right? And target F is about international cooperation. So I'm glad we still got 40% for target G, but that's something to remember for sure when you talk about early warnings, that it's about implementing target G of the Sendai framework. All right, our next question, 6. What are the 4 pillars of early warnings for all? It's the initiative that Sanjaya presented. Please select all options that apply. All right, so what do we have? Preparedness and response, 81. Disaster risk knowledge and management, 77. Okay, so you, many of you got it right. It was a bit of a difficult question, I must say. So the Early Warnings for All initiative comprises 4 pillars, and they are related to the 4 components of effective multi-hazard early warning systems. So that includes disaster risk knowledge, pillar number 1, detection, monitoring, and forecasting, which is pillar 2, dissemination and communication, that's pillar 3, and preparedness at all levels of society, which is pillar 4. And they're all very much interrelated. So for the system to be effective, all of these 4 pillars have to work well. As for the other response options, so let me show you the correct ones. Investing in disaster risk reduction and resilience is actually priority 3 of the Sendai framework for DRR. So it's something we also discussed. And leaving no one behind is a core principle of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and of the Sendai framework as well, of course. But these 2 options are not pillars of the Early Warnings for All initiative. So next question over to Wana.
Okay, 7 for gender. Why is it important to include gender dimensions in early warning and early action? Please select one option below to respond. Thank you very much. This is in fact a bit of a trick question because the answer is actually D, all of the above, because they all, A, B, C, all of them collectively highlight the importance of integrating gender dimensions in early warning and early action systems to enhance their effectiveness and inclusivity. Over to you, Dasha.
Thank you, Wana. Next question. To be effective, early warning systems must be. Select one of the options that you see. People-centered, end-to-end, multi-hazard, gender-responsive, or all of the above. All right, so what do we have? Great, that is indeed the correct answer. All of the above apply, and an effective early warning system must be multi-hazard, so designed to address different hazards that the location might experience. They also have to be end-to-end, so connecting the entire chain from hazard detection to concrete action by affected communities. It has to be people-centered, so designed with people and their differentiated needs in mind. And they also must be gender responsive and recognizing that men and women access, process, and respond to information in different ways, given the social and cultural organization of gender relations in a given society. So next question is for Warner.
Yes, me again. Please select one option below to complete. Please select one option below to complete the sentence. Gender responsive early warning system is to.
Is it not working?
It's fine. Such system. Yeah, it's fine. So I think the poll closed a bit early, but I think this is quite an easy question, given that we've been talking about gender quite extensively, and B is the only one that ends with the word gender. So if you put those two together, there you go. Okay, so B, such system should be defined by two factors. One, equal participation of women and men in early warning processes, and inclusion of gender-sensitive indicators based on context-specific research into gender and conflict dynamics. So thank you very much. And over to you, Dasha, again.
Thank you. Apologies for the blip. So the next one is the multi-hazard early warning scorecard can help local governments and relevant stakeholders to please select the correct option. All right. And again, all of the above, we should make it more complex. But that is indeed the correct answer. So the multi-hazard early warning scorecard really helps local governments and relevant stakeholders to better understand the status and capacities and gaps in terms of local implementation of multi-hazard early warning systems. It also contributes to improving the local level planning processes and to better design and implement such systems. It also contributes to implementing the target G of the Sendai framework, as we saw earlier, and it does promote through the different indicators included a people-centered, gender-responsive approach to multi-hazard early warning systems. And finally, that will be our last question. True or false, the multi-hazard early warning scorecard application process should only involve the emergency management department. All right, let's see. So 93% chose false, and that is the correct answer. Because the way that this scorecard addendum and overall the disaster resilience scorecard for cities is designed is to be used by local governments, but together in a multi-stakeholder process, so involving key sectors across government, the academia, for example, it can be the private sector and representatives of community. They must all be involved in the implementation of the scorecard. And all of these actors also must be involved in the design and implementation of multi-hazard early warning systems to be sure to make it effective and reflect all the needs of different parts of society. So the scorecard, we really encourage it to be done through a consultative process, a dialogue between different stakeholders. And the examples we have from its application in different countries, the most effective ones have been where the local government has led the process, but has also involved all key stakeholders and sectors of the city governance. So not just the emergency management department, but also the financial and budgeting department, urban planning departments, health, education sector, but also civil society organizations, the private sector, which might be responsible, for example, for telecommunications or energy provision in a city. So all of these actors are key to be part of the process. And it's very important that governments ensure this inclusive approach and good coordination across all the sectors and levels of governance. So with that, we're done with the quiz, and let us see who won. Okay, so we have Kathy, number 1, who got 10 out of 10, the quickest. We have several other participants who also made it very well, 10 out of 10, congratulations, but they took slightly longer. So thank you so much for actively participating. It was great to see so many numbers of you participating and getting most of the answers correctly. So we hope that it also shows that the presentations helped you to better understand these concepts, and we hope that you will be able to apply them as well. So now we're ready to conclude this first session of the first day of our joint online training. And before we close, I would like to provide a short overview of the key takeaways and from this session. So what we did today is that we explored some key concepts around risk and hazards and vulnerability and exposure. And we learned also that disaster risk is a combination of these 3 factors and of different social, economic, political drivers that are at play. We also learned that disasters are not natural. They are the result of the choices that we make of where we live and how we protect and support people and livelihoods. We also learned about some key global frameworks for resilience and disaster risk reduction, in particular the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which runs from 2015 to 2030. So we have 6 years left to implement it. We also learned how to support multi-hazard early warning systems and gender inclusion. And we looked in more detail into key components and principles of effective multi-hazard early warning systems. So if you remember, there are 4 components. And we also learned about different tools to support effective design and implementation and how to make multi-hazard early warning systems gender responsive. So all the materials and the presentations from this session will be made available to all of you, including those participants who are joining through the YouTube feed. Our colleagues have posted all the links in the folder, and you will also receive an email at the end of the workshop with all these links. And I would really like to encourage you to continue exploring the tools that we showed today. They are available online. We put them also in the participants folder, and UNDR and all our partners will be glad to support you if you have any questions or require any further assistance with these tools. And finally, I would like to remind once again of the requirements for obtaining a certificate for this course. So certificates will be given to those participants who attend each of the 3 sessions of the course, today, tomorrow, and on Thursday. So please make sure that you have registered your name and email in the daily attendance form that we have shared. And you also must complete the pre-workshop survey, which isn't available anymore. It should have been completed before the workshop, and the post-workshop assessment which will be shared at the end of the workshop. So with that, I would like to warmly thank once again all the co-facilitators today, UNDR and UN Women, as well as our co-organizers and co-hosts at UNPOG and UNITAR CIFAL Jeju, and in particular colleagues and interns who have been doing all the hard work and supporting the session behind the screen. So thank you so much. And a big thank you, of course, to our participants today for your active participation and your interest and the many questions. So with that, I would like to close this first session, and I invite my colleague, Mr. Samuel Dana from UNPOG, to introduce to you the program of the second session of this course, which will be tomorrow. So Dana, the floor is yours. Thank you. Please unmute yourself. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Thank you very much to Tasha and colleagues for a wonderful session. I just want to bring it to the attention of colleagues that we'll be having another wonderful session tomorrow. And maybe, Tasha, can you stop sharing your screen so that I'm able to do it?
Yes, I've stopped already.
It's frozen. Okay, so tomorrow we'll start at the same time from 2 Korea time to
So apologies, we will switch the presentation, I believe, to another colleague, and Dana will speak in a second. So please stay with us for another minute, and we'll explain tomorrow's session. Thank you.
Yes. Sorry for the technical issue. So session tomorrow will focus on digital transformation, digital government transformation, and AI for early warning system, as well as looking at it from the gender responsive sustainable development perspective. So this will be an intersection between digital government transformation or digital technologies, as well as linking it with other frontier technologies, including AI, and how we link it up with issues about gender. So tomorrow we are privileged to have excellent speakers from UNDESA to be delivering some tools and innovative mechanisms that could be leveraged for early warning systems as well as disaster risk reduction. We are also privileged to have speakers from the Republic of Korea giving some innovative practices on how AI is being leveraged for early warning systems and disaster risk reduction, from the Republic of from Japan and from the Philippines as well. We are also going to have the next part of tomorrow's section being linked to gender responsive issues or gender responsive dimension. And we're going to have speakers speaking on how to harness data and digital technologies for gender mainstreaming. We're going to also have speakers from UN Women as well, giving us a perspective on how data or disaggregated data could be used based on sex, age, and issues about disability. And one of the tools or one of the issues being mentioned today has been on the sex, age, and disability disaggregated data tool and how it will be used for DRR and resilience. We're also going to look at it from the perspective of interagency standing committee and how this works together, especially driving this from the country or from Nepal's case. So we look forward to welcoming you all to tomorrow's session tomorrow, and we hope you continue with this great engagement, and we are really very appreciative of having you tomorrow. See you tomorrow for a exciting session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a nice evening and day, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.